Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
This is what happened to me a couple years back. This is the first time that I have told anyone this story. If you happen to know whatever this is, please reply. Nobody will believe me, and in telling this to anyone that I knew would probably result in me getting locked in the crazy house. The horrid cylinders and even a single sign that they had been there were gone. They found nothing amiss in his house despite the bullet marks on the outside and inside. I did not see any actual visual horror, but it was a mental shock that sent me racing out of the lonely Akeley farmhouse. Be me. Be literature instructor at Miskatonic University and amateur student of New England folklore. Take lot of interest in the paranormal and local folklore. Rainy morning in Massachusetts. Sipping on my regular straight black coffee and flipping through the newspaper. Enjoy the patter of the rain falling on the windows. My eyes are focused on the center of the page, with there being pictures of the flood fattening up the swollen river. A bit after the newspapers covered the hardship and suffering caused by the flood, certain odd stories of things floating in the river were spread around. Happy that my friends are interested in what I have to say because of my study in folklore. I didn't really take it seriously at the time and just belittled what my friends had to say. It was just so clearly an overdone version of rustic superstitions. The three places where the organic shapes were found were Winooski River near Montpelier, West River in Windham County, and Passumpsic in Caledonia County above Lyndonville. Sadly, there were many human bodies found in the rivers during the flooding, but the people swore that the strange shapes were not human, despite the superficial resemblances in size and general outline. The witness added that the shapes couldn't belong to any known animal in Vermont. According to the witnesses, they were pinkish things about 5 feet across, with crustaceous bodies bearing vast pairs of dorsal fins, many sets of articulated limbs, a sort of convoluted ellipsoid covered with multitudes of very short antennae, where a head would normally be. Pretty remarkable to me how all the 3 different sightings all described the same creature in acute detail. The bodies described also seemed to coincide with the old local legends of the region. All the witnesses in every case that found the bodies near the river were all naive and simple backwood folk that had probably just witnessed battered and bloated bodies of humans or farm animals. I thought that they must have used the half-remembered folklore to invest the depressing sites with paranormal attributes. Decide to look even deeper into the folklore for more answers. The folklore is definitely forgotten by the present generation. The legend of the pinkish things are also reflected by even earlier Indian tales, I come to find. I know the legend well, but only through the rare monograph of Eli Davenport, written prior to 1839, which embraces all the folklore orally obtained via the oldest people of the state. The monograph coincided more closely with tales that I had personally heard from elders in the mountains of New Hampshire. Briefly summarized, the monograph told of a hidden race of beings that hid somewhere in the remote hills. The beings were rarely seen, and evidence of their presence were only reported by those who ventured farther than usual up into certain slopes of mountains and into deep, steep-sided gorges that even the wolves avoided. There were sightings of weird footprints and claw prints in the mud, strange circles of stones with the grass around them torn away. Certain caves of problematic depth in the sides of hills with their mouths closed off by boulders were reported of having prints leading both towards and away from them. Adventurous people had also seen them in the twilight of the remotest valley and above the limits of normal hill climbing. It wouldn't be as unsettling to me if all of the accounts didn't agree with each other so well. All of the rumors had several common points: that the creatures were a huge light red crab with many pairs of legs and 2 bat-like wings in the middle of the back. They have been sighted as walking on all of their legs, or just using their hinds like to carry large objects of indeterminate nature. One sighting saw a detachment of 3 of them wading along a shallow woodland watercourse in a disciplined formation. One of the specimens was seen flying, launching itself from the top of a bald, lonely hill at night and vanishing into the sky after its flapping wings had been silhouetted in an instant against the full moon. They seemed to be content and even let mankind alone, save for those venturesome individuals, and especially persons who built houses too close to certain valleys or too high up on certain mountains. According to the earliest of the legends, the creatures would only harm those trespassing on their privacy. But then there were the later accounts of their curiosity in respecting men and their attempts to establish outposts in the human world. There were tales of buzzing voices in imitation of human speech that made surprising offer to lone travelers on roads and cart paths, deep in the woods, and of children frightened out of their mind by things seen or heard in the forest. The last layer of the legend are references to hermits and remote farmers that at some point in their life went through a mental change and were shunned as mortals who sold themselves to the beings. It became a meme to call eccentric and unpopular recluses of being allies with the creatures. The common term used for the creatures was those ones, or the old ones. The bulk of the Puritan settlers called them bluntly familiars of the devil. Those with Celtic legends in their heritage linked them with fairies and the little people of bogs and raths, and protected themselves with incantation handed down through many generations. The Indians had the strangest beliefs of them, though. Different tribal legends differed, but the consensus was unanimously agreed that the creatures were not native to this earth. The Pennacook myths were the most consistent and picturesque. According to them, the winged ones came from the Great Bear in the sky, and had mines in the hills and took a stone that they could not get from any other world. They didn't live here, but had outposts and flew back with cargoes of stone to their own stars in the north. They only harmed those earth people who got too near or spied on them. Animals shunned them through instinctive hatred, and not from fear of being hunted. They couldn't eat the things and animals of earth and brought food from the stars. It was bad to get near them, and sometimes young hunters who went into their hills never came back. It wasn't good to listen to them either, because their voice sounded like that of a bee that tried to talk like a man. They knew the language of all kinds of men, Pennacook, Huron, men of the Five Nations, and didn't need their own language. They talked with their heads, which changed color in different ways. All of the legends, white and Indian, died down during the 19th century except for occasional flare-ups. They eventually remembered less and less of their fears and avoidances. Many people just simply knew that certain hilly regions were unhealthy, unprofitable, or just generally unlucky. Wild and dark hints existed of terrible hidden races of burrowers in Ireland and Wales. I laughed at such theories of races existing like this at the time. My friends added that the reports were too clear, consistent, and detailed to just be ignored. Fucking aliens aren't real, bro. The local newspaper, Brattleboro Reformer, reprinted one of my summaries in full on the creatures spotted in the flood. By the spring, I was almost a well-known figure in Vermont, even though I've never set foot there. Certain persons were attracted to what I had wrote, and Henry Akeley was one of them. He was the last representative on his home soil for a long, locally distinguished line of jurists, administrators, and gentlemen agriculturists. He was a notable student of mathematics, astronomy, biology, anthropology, and folklore at the University of Vermont. Never heard of him before, and he didn't write an autobiography about himself. But from the beginning I saw that he was a man of education and intelligence, albeit a recluse with little worldly sophistication. I no longer have his first letter that he sent me, but I can recall from memory and summarize it. He basically said that had evidence that the things do exist in the hills where nobody visited. He's seen footprints and heard their voices in the forest. At one place in his woods, he heard them increasingly often. He set up a phonograph and recorded them speaking and offered to send it to me. He said that they are constantly monitoring us and have spies among us, constantly gathering information. They have wings that can't fly in Earth's atmosphere but can fly through space. He says that they have mines and get metals that go deep under the hills. A good army of men could easily wipe out their colony. That is what they are afraid of. But if that happened, more would come from outside, any number of them. He says that they could easily conquer the Earth but would rather leave things as is to save bother. Near the end of the letter, he offers to send me extra copies of photos with their footprints. Usually I would have just laughed at this type of letter. The tone of the letter made me take it with paradoxical seriousness, though. He was so specific, and it fit surprisingly well with some of the old myths. Be a bit later. Pictures eventually arrive in the mail. Before I called it a footprint, but claw print would be a better term. It was extremely crab-like, and there was no way to tell what direction it was moving. It wasn't a very deep or fresh print, and it seemed to be about the size of a human foot. From the central pad, pairs of saw-toothed flippers projected in opposite directions, as if the whole object were exclusively an organ of locomotion. Another photo was taken at the mouth of a woodland cave, with a boulder of rounded curiousness choking the aperture. There was a dense network of tracks in front of it. The third photo showed a druid-like circle of standing stones on the summit of a wild hill. The extreme remoteness of the place was apparent by the veritable sea of tenantless mountains, which formed the background and stretched away towards a misty horizon. There were other monographs and photos that he sent, but I won't quote or form those words onto paper. For reasons that I will get into later, I pray that the moon beyond Pluto stays undiscovered. Some of my mail starts to go missing. I go to the post office to figure out where it is, and they say that it was never delivered to them. Fuck. Akeley tells me that the things are beginning to close in on him with a new degree of determination. The nocturnal barking of the dogs whenever the moon was dim was constant, and there were attempts to hurt him on the lonely roads he had to traverse by day. On the 2nd of August, while driving to the village in his car, a tree trunk was laid in the middle of the road where the highway ran through a deep patch of woods. The barking of his 2 great dogs told him all too well of the things that were lurking near. What would have happened to him had his dogs not been there? From then on, he doesn't leave the house with at least 2 of his dogs. Other road experiences occurred on the August 5th and 6th, a shot grazing his car on an occasion, and the barking of the dogs telling of the unholy woodland presences in the trees. On August 15th, I received a letter that disturbed me greatly. On the night of the 12/13th, bullets flew outside the farmhouse, and 3 of the 12 great dogs were found shot dead in the morning. There were myriads of claw prints in the road, with the human prints of Walter Brown among them. Akeley tried to telephone Brattleboro for more dogs that night, but the wire went dead. Later, he drove into Brattleboro and learned that linemen found the main cable neatly cut at a point where it ran through the deserted hills north of Newfane. He went home with 4 new dogs and several cases of ammunition for his big game repeating rifle. My attitude was starting to change about this situation. Am I going to be probed by these aliens? I'm afraid for Akeley and his remote and lonely farmhouse, but I also now have a connection with the strange hill problem. He sends more letters telling of the death of more dogs and the purchase of others. The exchange of gunfire become a common thing on each moonless night. A new letter reached me on the 28th of August. There was another gunfight. He put out a light and used the windows and raked all around the house with rifle fire just high enough not to hit the dogs. He said that seemed to scare them off. In the morning, he found great pools of blood, with pools of green sticky stuff that had a terrible odor. 5 of his dogs were killed. He thinks that the men at the dog pound in Brattleboro think that he is crazy, getting more and more dogs so often. A day after that gunfight, it was a moonless night. They talked to him that night. They weren't going to let him go run away to California alive, and with his only son. 6 more dogs were killed that night, and he felt presences of them all along the wooded parts of the road when he drove to Brattleboro. On September 6th, he decides to send me the most surprising letter yet. The attitude and tone of his letters are now completely switched. He says that he misjudged the beings and he regrets the harm that he inflicted upon them in the nightly skirmishes. He says that they bear him no grudge, because their emotions are organized very differently than ours. He says that they told him that there is a secret cult of evil men devoted to the purpose of tracking them down and injuring them on the behalf of powers from other dimensions. Doubt.jpg. He says that the things told him that the very idea of an attempt to enslave or degrade mankind is ridiculous. He says that the outer beings are the most marvelous organic things in or beyond all space and time, members of a cosmos-wide race of which all other life forms are merely degenerate variants. He explains that they are more vegetable than animal, have a somewhat fungoid structure through the presence of a chlorophyll-like substance and a very singular nutritive system, differentiate them altogether from true cormophytic fungi. Their brain capacity exceeds that of any other surviving life form, although the winged types of his hill country are by no means the most highly developed. I have to see this shit for myself. I decide to leave New England and head off to Brattleboro to meet Akeley. I take the train and tell no one but Akeley that I will be coming. Can't afford to let anyone know that I'm an alien ally. At my last stop on the train, I look through the line of motors and try to see which one could be Akeley Ford. It clearly wasn't Akeley, but a younger and more urbane person extended his hand out to me and asked if I was indeed Wilmarth. Yeah, bro. I get in the car and start the ride to Akeley. The driver was so cheerful and normal that it should have cheered me up, but oddly enough, I felt only the more disturbed as we bumped and veered onwards into the unknown wilderness. We eventually pulled up to a 2.5-story house with unusual size and elegance for the region. There were congeries of contiguous of arcade-linked barns, sheds, and windmill behind and to the right. The fear rose inside of me as I came to the realization that I was actually in the place so morbidly written to me. I looked to my right and looked down the dry and almost powdery dirt. They were the hellish tracks of the living fungi from the outer reaches of the solar system. I pulled myself together in time to stifle my scream. The driver, who was already inside, was talking to Akeley, and he said that he wouldn't be able to be a competent host for a day or two, due to asthma. The spells of asthma hit him hard when they came, and they were accompanied with a debilitating fever and general weakness. I could find him in the study at the left of the front hall, the room where the blinds were shut. Apparently, he had to keep the sunlight out when he was ill, for his eyes were very sensitive. Before I went inside, I realized what I thought was wrong. The total silence. Usually a farm is a bit murmurous, but all the signs of farm life were missing. The cows, of which Akeley had said he possessed several, might have been sent out to pasture, and the dogs might have been sold, but the absence of sound was truly frightening. I didn't pause for too long on the path, but only entered through the door with distinct psychological effort. I walk inside and go to meet Akeley. He tells me that there is a meal spread for me in the dining room and that he will be a better host tomorrow. I move to the dining room and relish the meal that he spread out before me. There was an ample array of sandwiches, cake, and cheese. A thermos bottle next to a cup testified that hot coffee had not been forgotten. I poured myself a cup of coffee and decide to see how hot it is by only drinking a spoonful. The spoonful revealed a faintly unpleasant, acrid taste. After eating, night began to fall. With Akeley's permission, I lit a small oil lamp, turned it low, and set it on a distant bookcase in the study where Akeley sat. Afterwards, I was sorry that I had done so, for it made my host's strained, immobile face and listless hands look damnably abnormal and corpse-like. He looked half incapable of motion, though I saw him nod stiffly once. He begins to explain to me how the outer beings were going to take him to their world. It seemed that complete human bodies did not indeed make the trip. There was a harmless way to extract a brain, and a way to keep the organic residue alive during its absence. He had 4 types of alien cylinders in his possession. 3 humans, 6 fungoid beings who can't navigate space corporeally, 2 beings from Neptune, and the rest entities from the central cavern of an especially interesting dark star beyond the galaxy. Akeley hands me a listening device and puts a human cylinder into a machine. I begin to hear human speech through it. Do you realize what it means when I say I have been on 37 different celestial bodies, planets, dark stars, and less definable objects? My brain has been removed from my body by fissions so adroit that it would be crude to call the operation surgery. Altogether, I hope most heartily that you will decide to come with Mr. Akeley and me. Akeley then tells me that we should adjourn our session for tomorrow. I mechanically obey and shut off all 3 switches, dazed with doubt of everything that just occurred. Still dazed, I bade my host good night and went upstairs with the lamp, even though I had a pocket flashlight with me. As I stood there next to the bed, pondering what I had just learned, I decided that this knowledge was not meant for normal humans to be meddling with. There was no way in hell I would spend another night here. Sleep is out of the question, so I extinguished the lamp and threw myself on the bed fully dressed. Don't ask me how long my unexpected sleep went for. If I were to tell you that I woke up at a certain time and heard and saw certain things, you would answer that I did not wake then, and that everything was a dream until the moment I rushed out of the house, stumbled to the shed where I'd seen the old Ford, and stole that car for a mad, aimless race over the haunted hills to a village that turned out to be Townsend. You'll discount everything else and declare that all the pictures, record sounds, cylinder and machine sounds, and kindred evidences were lies told by the missing Henry Akeley. I wish that I had stopped to memorize the license plate on the car, but it is probably better that I didn't. To keep far from such influences is all that I ask of life in the future. When my frantic story sent a sheriff's posse out to the farmhouse, Akeley was gone without leaving a trace. The dogs and livestock were indeed missing, and there were bullet holes on the house's exterior and on some of the walls within. But beyond this, nothing unusual could be detected. I stayed in Brattleboro for a week after this, and asked people of every kind that had known Akeley. The results convinced me that the matter is no dream or delusion. Akeley had strange purchases of dogs and ammunition and chemicals, and the cutting of his telephone wires are matters of record. When I left Brattleboro, I resolved never to go back to Vermont. I'll now tell what happened that last night in complete detail. Just what awaked me I cannot say, but at this point I can say that I was definitely awake. I heard creaking floorboards in the hall outside my door, and a clumsy muffled fumbling at the latch. This, however, stopped at once. After that stopped, I began to hear several speakers from down below, and I judged that they were controversially engaged. By the time I had listened a few seconds, I was brought awake, as the sound of the voices made all thought of sleep ridiculous. Two of the voices were obviously the buzzing the outer beings used in their communication with men. The two were individually different, pitch, accent, and tempo, but they were both of the damnable general kind. The third voice was indubitably that of a mechanical machine with one of the detached brains in the cylinders. Today, from their conversation, I refused to form any definite deductions from them, and their frightful effect was one of suggestion rather than of revelation. Was it possible that Akeley has been threatened and used as a lure to draw me into the hills with the letters and pictures and phonograph record? Did the beings mean to engulf us in a common destruction because we had come to learn too much? My instinct told me something was terribly wrong. The acrid coffee that I had refused to drink, was there an attempt to drug it? I have to talk to Akeley and restore his sense of judgment. They had hypnotized him with their promise of cosmic revelations, but he has to listen to reason. We must get out of here before it is too late. If I'm not able to convince him, then I would go myself. There's a good chance that the Ford in the garage is ready for instant use. I tiptoed down the creaking stairs to the lower hall, and on the right, I could hear the gaping blackness of the study in which I heard the voices. Pushing on the door of the living room, I pointed my flashlight towards the source of the snoring. It wasn't Akeley, it was the guide that drove me here. I moved the beam of my flashlight to the center table, and it reveals a cylinder with sight and hearing machines attached, ready to be connected at any moment. God knows what mysteries would have been solved had I talked to the machine. It's probably merciful that I left it alone. I hear faint creaks from the side door, and I let out a small shriek. It wasn't quite loud enough to awake the driver, and I can still hear him snoring. It's a wonder that I did not drop my flashlight and revolver in the wild scramble. Without further noise, I drag myself and my belongings to the old Ford in the shed, to set that archaic vehicle in motion towards some unknown point of safety in the black, moonless night. Later on, the police found, perfect to the last subtle detail of microscopic resemblance, or identity, were the face and hands of Henry Wentworth Akeley. Someone help me, I'm at my wit's end.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.